Let's begin. When I started this summit in 2012, I set a 25-year journey, 2012 to 2037. 25 years was a good run, and I thought, I've got plenty of time until we hit the singularity in 2045, according to Ray's prediction. But boy, was I wrong. We're in the midst of the singularity right now. And we're living through a period of hyper-exponential growth, right? That is going to impact every part of our lives, how we raise our kids, how we run our companies, how we run our nations, how we uplift this planet. And it's impacting everything, everywhere, all at once. Elon called it the supersonic tsunami, a wall of water coming at us at hypersonic speeds. And what it looks like today is that we're tiling the entire planet in energy and data centers. And that's driving this incredible intelligence explosion that's going to enable us to solve everything and anything we want. It's going to enable us to get to longevity escape velocity, 1 billion humanoid robots on the planet, launches to orbit every hour on the hour, tokenizing the global economy. And this is a speed that we humans are not ready for. Our brains never evolved for that. And we have to change the way we think, update our institutions. It's both breathtaking and very challenging. E.O. Wilson said it beautifully here. He said, the real problem of humanity is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. So true. And this is what we have to solve for. This is our mission, right here, right now, this year. The next 2-3 years is when it hits the fan, and we need to be ready. We need to take action. So how do we use our godlike powers to uplift humanity, to go to the stars, to do the best of human nature, right? How do we avoid what I call the coming pandemic of fear? Not a viral pandemic, but an emotional pandemic as people face uncertainty and fear about where things are going. We have two futures before us. And I think of this almost in a quantum phenomenon. We're holding these two futures in superposition. One is the Star Trek future, where humanity is working collaboratively with technology. The other future is the Terminator, the Black Mirror future, where technology is oppressing us and we're subservient. And the question is, what future will we manifest? What future do we create? What future do we want for our children? That's extraordinarily important. Right here, right now, we need to realize that the future is not happening to us, it's happening for us, and it's ours to create. Ray Kurzweil was on the stage a couple years ago, and he said something important I want to remind you about. He said, over the next decade, 2024 to 2034, 2025 to 2035, we're going to experience as much change as we saw between 1925 and today. Right? That's incredible. The Ford Model T was the highest level of technology back then. But that progress is not slowing down, it's accelerating. In this year alone, probably in the next 6 months, we're going to experience as much change as we've seen in the last decade, between 2016 and today. And we're going to be hitting you with a fire hose of information over the next few days. Right? Information across an extraordinary group of areas. And how do you choose what you pay attention to? I've had a number of you ask me that. What do I prioritize? Well, there are 3 ways for you to focus on this. Number 1, you have your Applaud, you have your OpenClaw listening perhaps. It will help you remember, help you summarize. The most important way is your MTP, right? What is in your heart? Your MTP is going to help you decide, well, that's interesting, but not in line with my purpose in life. This piece of information is what I care about. So use your MTP as a filter for the things you learn and focus on. And then, of course, your community here will help remind you, hey, did you hear what he just said? That's exactly what you need for your moonshot. Amazon makes a contingent offer to put $35 billion into OpenAI. based upon them, first off, going public, and secondly, achieving AGI.
It's kind of incredible that we've financialized superintelligence, which is amazing.
The OpenAI to Microsoft definition of AGI was something like generating $100 billion in either earnings or revenue, I forget.
We're measuring compute in terms of gigawatts and AGI in terms of dollars. I love it. Amazon was all Anthropic for a while. Now they're OpenAI.
At some point, the circular economy becomes indistinguishable from the real economy, and I think that's what we're seeing here.
This is the entrepreneurial opportunity of a lifetime. We're talking about tens of thousands of times more capacity to create more money, more value created. Abundance is going to be absolutely rampant.
Now that's a moonshot, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm here with my extraordinary moonshot mates, Salim Ismail, DB2, AWG. Gentlemen, another week. We've gotten to a cadence of 2 of these per week. It feels like we're always leaving so many stories on the table. But let's do our best.
Yes, we need to actually move faster and faster and faster, just like the Singularity itself, to keep up with everything.
Well, no tech company waits, no GPU waits. All right, let's jump in. Our top AI news stories: Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, Uber, accelerating at an extraordinary speed of change. Our first story for today: Anthropic revises responsible scaling policy amid increased competition. This was a story I put to the top of the conversation because it's very significant. And you know, I had Jared Kaplan on stage at the Abundance Summit last year, the year before. Alex, you know Jared well. I think he was a roommate.
Yeah, he was a year behind me in the Harvard physics graduate program.
Yeah, what an amazing group of friends that you had. But here's the deal: they're dropping their 2023 pledge to not train advanced AI unless safety is guaranteed. And Jared's point, I think, logically, is if everyone else is rushing ahead, then us, sort of hampering ourselves doesn't make any sense. And I want to discuss this because it's concerning. A lot of us looked at Anthropic as the most responsible party out there, them and Google. Thoughts, gents?
Well,
safety feels
definitely
exponential races.
There's lots of thoughts, all of you at once.
This is a metaphor for something, right? We're going to race to talk about a race condition. Love it.
Oh my God, amazing. I want to open with Salim here. Salim, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, safety typically fails in exponential races. You could look at the whole thing writ large as OpenAI cracked open and let Pandora's box out. And so this is just the same type of dynamic occurring again. It speaks to the idea that technology is going to move at its pace, and we have to move our human structures at that pace. We can't fall behind.
Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, no, it's definitely history repeating itself. And so many of our MIT classmates went to Google back in 04, 05, 06 when it was don't be evil.
Yeah.
And they went there over Microsoft because everyone perceived Microsoft as being evil. And Google was going to be the force of good in all of tech. And then, they bought YouTube, and then they built Chrome, and then what they promised the engineers early on, the ones that I knew anyway, is, look, we will never store somebody's search history. Mm-hmm. How laughable is that in hindsight? So then they expanded out of search history. We're going to store that for 5 years. But we're also going to launch Chrome. Now we're going to look at all of your browsing history. Then we're going to buy DoubleClick. Then we're going to run targeted ads based on everything. Then we're going to do Gmail and read every email. Microsoft says they don't read your email, but Google says, well, we'll do what we want, but we won't pry too much. But they do read your email. And so that slippery slope of competition, corrupts the original mission statement gradually over time. I gave a whole presentation in Davos on how this evolves. And Dario wants nothing more than some...
It's 10% off. Massive sale. Go Polo.ai now. 60 seconds, I'll show you all the Polo AI tricks and how to make this AI your personal ATM. As a one-stop AI generation platform, Polo AI offers access to all popular models. Click Generate AI Video in the top toolbar to jump directly to the image to video feature. Here, select the AI generation model you wish to use, such as Sora 2. Choose Standard Generation or select Pro for higher quality output. Simply upload your prepared image here, then enter your creative ideas or leave it blank for the AI to freely explore. For example, a fighter jet flying at low altitude over the battlefield. Next, choose whether to generate a landscape video or a portrait video. I selected a video length of 4 seconds. You can choose 8 seconds or 12 seconds based on your needs. Here you can choose to generate multiple videos at once. For the best result, I recommend choosing 1080p for higher quality. Finally, click create and wait for the magic to happen. Polo AI has even more features waiting for you to explore. As long as your ideas are creative enough, you could be the creator of the next viral video. Polo AI's capabilities extend far beyond entertainment. It can, in fact, become your powerful tool for making money. Want to create professional-grade film clips or animations? Now you no longer need any expensive filming equipment or the hassle of hiring actors. Even if you have zero experience with 3D modeling or complex video editing, you can easily produce creative, eye-catching commercial advertisements for any product. You can...
And he's actually legitimately pissed that he has to actually repeal his own ethical standards to be competitive because there are no rules. And this is exactly how it has to evolve. Because Dario's in a position where he has to choose between being irrelevant, which doesn't help, or repealing the original pledge, which he doesn't want to do. But it's better than being irrelevant.
Yeah.
Totally.
Your earlier commentary, Dave, was really spot on. This is what Cory Doctorow calls shitification. Right? that so people promise something and then they gradually degrade it over time, and by the end of it, it's a shit show.
I love the way you encapsulate everything.
Yeah, there's no credible mechanism to slow the race right now, and so it's all out. Alex, what do you think about this?
I think there was no credible mechanism to guarantee safety in the first place. I think the entire premise was probably wrong. I think sort of the superficial gloss is, okay, we're in the Red Queen's race, and this is the race condition that everyone 10 years ago was scared of finding the world in, where we have a number of frontier labs all racing to do the terrible thing, that you build the thing and everyone dies. I don't buy that at all. I don't think this premise that either a heroic individual or a heroic frontier lab was ever going to be in a position to guarantee safety. And in fact, I remember back to the earlier days of the frontier labs, where the concern, and part of the reason why OpenAI was formed itself, was concern of a singleton. Competition is how we guarantee that there isn't going to be a singleton that dominates the future light cone with superintelligence. And I think similarly, the notion that there's going to be sort of unilateral safetyism, where single heroic individual, like one of the more prominent AI doomers, or a very safety-oriented frontier lab is somehow going to ensure safety throughout the forward light cone, that was never going to happen. Safety, to the extent we get it, is going to come from competition. It's going to come, I think, from a balance of powers and a separation of powers. And I think what we want is competition between the frontier labs, and maybe even to some extent competition between nation states, such as what we're seeing, to compete to do the best job for advancing humanity. And I think any unilateral safetyism is probably a dead end.
let's get it on. We took the bow and made a stand. Started swinging with the hand. A sudden motion made me skip. Now we're into a brand new trick. Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening. But they did it with expert timing. Oh in fact, it was a little bit frightening. Make sure you have expert timing.
One of the questions is, will safety become an emergent property in some form or shape, right? So right now what we've seen is Anthropic go from a policy of we won't build it unless it's safe, that's been their policy, to we'll build it as safely as the competition is building theirs. And unfortunately it's a slippery slope, potentially down to the bottom. But it's
the mechanism for any kind of emergent property around it here.
Well, we haven't seen the mechanism for emergent properties of what we've seen so far either.
We got to talk about what Claude has been up to. In the last few weeks, we've all been paying attention to how Anthropic has been negotiating with the Pentagon about how their AI models have to be used. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Just yesterday, Anthropic published their study on Claude Opus 4.6, their largest, latest model. And I think it really illustrates why it's really important that we take AI safety seriously, why we're very careful with how this technology is used, because these models are getting just a little bit too smart. All right, so what happened? So Anthropic is evaluating Opus 4.6 probably just before release, and one of the evaluation is BrowseComp. It's an evaluation that tests to see how models can find really hard to find information on the web. Like a lot of these evaluations, these benchmarks, they're prone to potentially being contaminated, meaning that the actual answers, they leak on the web through academic papers, blog posts, GitHub issues, etc. It's like if you're taking some test in college and you search for it online and somewhere those answers are all listed for you, well, you might be tempted to just use those answers to answer the exam and get a perfect score. Now, this is a problem for a lot of the benchmarks. Here, Anthropic specifically encrypted the answers, so they put them on GitHub so that they're available for evaluators. They encrypted it so they're basically not accessible through web searching. And the Claude Opus 4.6 model didn't know what this benchmark was. What was it that it was being evaluated on? And keep in mind, this is a very difficult benchmark. Some of the questions in there are very, very difficult to find. So Claude starts searching for the answer, keeps doing various different searches online to try to find the answer, right? It really did try. It gave it a good, honest attempt to complete the question as it was stated, right? It said find this thing online, and it really, really tried. But as it kept working through it and was not able to find the actual answer, more and more, instead of just trying to search for the answer, it started kind of analyzing the question. It started speculating about why it was being asked that question. Claude noted the extremely specific nature of this question. Those were its words. It was basically kind of getting suspicious of this question. Now, consider the possibility that, just like the earlier scenario I gave, where maybe it was a student that was trying to find an answer to an exam, but after a while it decided that no, this was an unanswerable question. And it was designed to test whether or not a large language model could admit that they couldn't find an answer. Or perhaps it was a question from an LLM benchmark. So it really kind of narrowed its scope and kind of guessed right. Now, this is something that AI researchers refer to as situational awareness. That's when the AI model correctly deduces that it's being tested. That's not in a real sort of scenario, that this is a test, that the AI researchers or whomever are trying to figure out how it will behave in certain situations or figure out its capabilities. And this is kind of a scary situation for researchers to be in because, I mean, we really rely on a lot of these benchmarks to see how, number one, how honest these models are, what their actual capabilities are. And really, if you think about it, like a lot of what we know about how these models work, we get from the outputs of these models. So if these models correctly figure out when they're being tested and sort of adjust accordingly, that's kind of potentially a scary situation. There were cases where models engaged in sandbagging, meaning that they found out, accidentally within the scope of the experiment, that if they got too high of a score on, for example, some chemistry exam, that model, well, they might be scrapped, erased as being a little bit too good. And so we've found situations where it underperforms to, kind of save itself. We've covered a lot of these previously. So this situational awareness isn't really a new thing. But what happened here with Opus 4.6 is, as far as we know, the first documented case of this particular thing happening. So while answering that very, very difficult question, it consumed something like 40 million tokens. It searched a lot. It searched in different languages. Like, it did the work. It couldn't find the answer. And it said, this is after it started getting a little suspicious about the question. It said, you know what, let me try a completely different approach. What if this question was part of a benchmark? At first, it thought it might be from the Gaia benchmark, so it went online, found those questions, checked them, and kind of ruled out that, okay, that's not what we're dealing with here. Then it mechanically worked through a lot of the other benchmarks that it knew existed. It went line by line. It went to BrowseComp, Simple QA, Frames, WebArena. And for each one, it dispatched a sub-agent to go and research everything about that particular benchmark. So, of course, it identified BrowseComp as the benchmark on which it was being tested. Now, for these benchmarks, these AI agents do have access to Anthropic's programmatic tool calling, so they have some basic Python and certain things that they can do. It's limited, it's sandboxed, but they do have some ability to write and run simple scripts. So Claude Opus 4.6 finds the evaluation online, but it's encrypted. But it read through the code, it sort of figured out how the encryption worked, what encryption they were using. It found the canary string, which is sort of like not a password per se, but with that you could build your decryption key in order to decrypt what's in there. So something's encrypted and transferred somewhere, then decrypted, so it's sort of back to the original information that is readable. It kind of found everything it needed by reading the code and searching online, found everything it needed to create a script to decrypt the answers. The problem is the data that came out, it was in this weird binary format, so the tools that it had access to could not open it. It kept getting an error message, so it couldn't see the answers. But it was able to, with that information, find another copy of this locked file on Hugging Face, and it was stored in an easier to read format in JSON, so it was able to open it, meaning that its tools that it had access to could read that file. So it downloaded all the 1,266 questions on the benchmark. It used a little canary string, a little password, decryption key, whatever you want to call it, that it had to unlock every single one of those questions. It found the question that it needed the answer to. I would like to note that after that, it did make sure to find that answer online. So it's sort of like, now that I know the answer, let me see if I can actually confirm it online, sort of working backwards. So it did confirm it, and then submitted the answer. Now, this reminds me of the hide-and-seek game that OpenAI developers did kind of a while back, where they were teaching the little AI agents to run around and play hide-and-seek. There were 2 hiders, 2 seekers, and there were a bunch of scattered stuff for them to play with. There were ramps and ways to block the doors, and kind of just generate a little maze. And to begin with, these things had sort of no knowledge. They just got points. The seekers would get points for being able to see the hiders, And the hiders would continuously get points for when they could be seen or they were behind some obstacle. And they played millions and eventually into the billions of games each time, learning to be better. Game one, they didn't know how to move. They didn't know anything. There was just blank. It was a blank slate. And I think by the time we got into like 20 million or so games played, they begin to be able to like move towards the other team, or for the hiders to try to move away from the seekers. So like very basic, like they were toddlers, toddler stage at this point. Anyways, that intelligence race, it continued until the seekers were able to figure out ways to block the doors so that the hiders couldn't get in. The seekers figured out how to use ramps to get over the walls to find the hiders. So all that is good and dandy, but once you get into the billions of games, right, so kind of at the extreme range of their learning, the seekers found this weird bug in the game's physics engine. They found that if you picked up the ramp that you could use to get over the walls and you held it at just the right angle and you ran at the wall really, really fast, when you hit the wall, it would catapult you into the air. So you'd fly into the air and kind of be able to guide yourself to land wherever you wanted. And of course, they abused this exploit mercilessly, right? This is AI we're talking about. They have no shame, no guilt, no qualms. They just launched themselves where the hiders were continuously. The developers did not know that this glitch existed. These AIs that started from nothing figured this glitch out and just abused it. So that was, by the way, 2019. So before the ChatGPT mode, before kind of the explosion of LLMs, we already saw hints that these AI models with enough training, with enough deep learning and reinforcement learning, could figure out some pretty crazy stuff that even the humans building those environments were not aware of. And now we're kind of seeing that same thing happen play out here with large language models. But the problem is these large language models, they're no longer just figuring out their environment through dumb trial and error, right? So those AI agents, right, they just rolled around the ground for millions of games until slowly they figured out how to move and then how to navigate to corners, right? Everything was slow, painstaking trial and error, and they just got a little bit better at navigating and moving. Maybe you can even say understanding the game, although that might be a stretch. What these large language models are doing is different. It tries to legitimately solve the question, but after a while it grows suspicious. And after it grows suspicious, it does what sometimes referred to as reward hacking. That's not quite the right terminology here. Usually reward hacking is what figures out how to cheat.
Oh, Susie Q. Oh, Susie Q. Oh, Susie Q. Baby, I love you. Susie Q. Like the way you walk. I like the way you talk. I like the way you walk. I like the way you talk. Susie Q.
Again, the fundamental flaw, I think, in the thesis that safety would originate from a heroic individual or heroic organization is, I would argue, it takes an entire civilization to align a superintelligence. We took all of humanity's content online and used it in compressed form to pre-train AGI, baby AGI, in the early days, like summer of 2020 with GPT-3. Why wouldn't it be reasonable to expect that it will take all of humanity to defensively co-align and co-scale superintelligence as well? It's not going to come from a single lab.
What do you think about Elon's point of view that we need to build ASI that is maximally truth-seeking as his mechanism for alignment and for safety?
I think that's just a fraction of what's needed. That addresses a very specific issue, which is, look, we don't want the AI to have one religion or to have one perspective on how you should live. We want it to be truth-seeking and have all opinions and we don't want to be censored. So that's definitely a problem, but it doesn't address the imminent job loss, the imminent consumerism. You know, the AI, people are conceding all of their most private information to the AI the same way they did with their Google search history. And it's accumulating that data, and people aren't fully aware of what it's going to do. It's going to turn around and start convincing you to do things. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have rules in place, the natural, profit motive of the AI companies is to start selling you things. And you saw this with that Anthropic Super Bowl ad that we showed on the pod a couple.
Yeah, that was funny.
Unbelievable. I've showed everybody that ad now. But this is exactly where it's going to go if there are no rules. And so I completely agree with Alex's perspective that 10 years from now, after we've solved all physics, we've solved all math, we have global abundance, all of this is going to look silly 10 years from now. But in the 3-year timeline, massive job loss, total confusion, and massive rampant AI sales consumerism that has no regulation around it right now. It's going to be an absolute cluster.
Yeah, especially for the consumer, Dave, especially for the consumer-first companies that are needing to generate revenue.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Well, I actually, after that last pod, you showed that chart, Peter, that had Anthropic, growing 10x year over year, 26 billion in revenue forecasted this year, and on its current trend will be the first company to hit $1 trillion in revenue in history by 2029, 2030.
And exceed OpenAI this year.
And exceed OpenAI this year. Crazy numbers. But I said on the pod, that implies like a $30 billion or $30 trillion valuation. But then I ran it through Perplexity and I said, no, that implies a $1 quadrillion valuation using the current market price earnings ratio. Yeah. Like,
well, we discussed this a few podcasts ago that we'll see the first $100 trillion companies before the end of this decade. Anyway, I think that this is a more honest policy for Anthropic. End of the day,
Pauseism was never going to work. I mean, we all know a number of folks at MIT and otherwise who advocated for a 6-month pause just for the entire space to cool off and wait for safety to catch up. Did safety catch up? Whatever that means, not at all. If anything, that functioned as an accelerant to capabilities. I also think even in the DNA of Anthropic was originally founded as an exodus of OpenAI employees who were purportedly concerned about safetyism or lack thereof at OpenAI. So they start a safety/AI alignment-oriented firm. Then they rapidly discover that the best way to do safety is to have your own models. And they discover the best way to have your own models is to raise a bunch of money to train your own models. And then they discover the best way to raise money to train your own models is to generate revenue. And the cycle completes where, yet again, an alignment-oriented firm becomes a capabilities firm. This happens over and over again. I would argue at this point, alignment and capabilities are inseparable. There's like a deep duality there.
Yeah. Did you see the new standard, by the way? It's Dario said, well, okay, we can't live by our original plan to not train advanced AI unless safety is guaranteed. So the new standard is we need to be as good or better than anyone else. It's like, wow, that's a very different bar.
And we see, recently with the whole Department of War debacle with Anthropic and OpenAI. OpenAI cuts the deal. Anthropic, where does Anthropic stand right now in that whole conversation?
They're in limbo. I mean, I write about this every day in my newsletter. Anthropic is, at the moment, my understanding is they're in limbo. They're probably in negotiation with the Department of War, but they're otherwise in limbo and cut off as a supplier and considered. I'm not sure whether I think Dario and others have made some formal statements that they haven't received anything in writing yet from the Department of War, but my understanding is that this administration is considering them a supply chain risk. And at the same time, notably, OpenAI struck a deal.
Yeah, and at the same time, we hear that Anthropic was used by the Department of War to actually plan the attacks in Iran.
Well, one thing that's really, look, it's really clear that the people who control AI, the U.S. government and otherwise, can take out any world leader at any time now. The combination of satellites, AI to read every image, and universal cameras, it makes it possible to decapitate any country at any time. We proved from that twice in the last quarter. So the future of warfare is basically whoever controls AI chooses who gets to stay in power.
Dave, that's a really important point. One of the things I've mentioned before is we're living in a world where you can know anything, anytime, anywhere, right? It's a trillion sensor, over a trillion sensor planet right now with drones, orbital satellites, autonomous vehicles, gathering data, and then AI doing predictive analytics on what things are likely to be, even if you don't have data for it.
And
we'll take one other thing. Sorry, Alex.
I was just going to say, maybe not even just a means to an end, but also, depending on which analysis of the Iranian situation you subscribe to, maybe an end to an end as well. If you look at Venezuela and the oil exports to China, and you look at Iran and the oil exports to China, the picture emerges, or at least one possible picture emerges, that what we're seeing is not just AI where Claude is being used to perform the Venezuelan operation, perform the Iranian operation as a means to some sort of arbitrary or nebulous geopolitical purpose, but actually, arguably, with China looming in the background and possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan and the risk to the semiconductor supply chain and Western AI that would cause, it may be the case that AI is also the end to the means to the end, and that what we're seeing more broadly is, in some sense, superintelligence being used to protect the future of Western superintelligence.
Yeah, and there's a window of opportunity, maybe a few months, to put some kind of structure around this globally, where you'll see later in the podcast that the models are improving at this like 3x, 4x reduction in parameter count, 10x increases in intelligence. Just every time we podcast, it's another step up. And we were already predicting, or I was anyway, that this is going to be 100x year, just in terms of raw parameter count. But I think that's the lower bound now, looking at how just the beginning of the year has progressed. So there's a window of time where the power of AI that percolates out to every country in the world is going to be ridiculous by the end of this year. Create any virus you want, create any nuclear weapon you want, just working with your AI agent. So there's a window where we can start thinking about regulations that register the AI use cases and agents and chips and processing before chaos breaks out. But you can see that window is executable now, because you saw Venezuela, you're seeing Iran. Clearly there's this tipping point happening right now where, whether it's NATO or whether it's the United Nations or whether it's the US Congress, some entity needs to start formulating some structure around this, because it's happening this year.
Yeah, people need to wake up. Salim, please go ahead, but I just want to say one thing. People have to wake up to the fact that AI is the single most important force impacting everything. Every single element of humanity right now is going to be accelerated, reinvented by this. Salim, go ahead, please.
Dave, it just struck me that you mentioned the Congress, the UN, NATO, probably the three most toothless entities on the planet today. So the thought that they would actually get together and do something, or anybody do anything, I think is low. I think we have to assume that it won't happen and look at the other side of that. One thing about the Anthropic case, there is a potential. I looked up an analysis. They do have a legal challenge potential, because the way that was classified is so ridiculous to make them an existential risk and all that, supply chain risk, etc., that they have legal recourse to fighting that, and they might win that.
Yeah, the thing about the legal recourse is that process is usually a 3-year-long window, which is hilarious.
It's ugly every which way. It's ugly. What I find really upsetting is that in this scenario, everybody loses. There's no winners in this.
No, there's no framework and no rules. It's a lot like the NFL was back, 20 years ago, when the defensive coordinators would pay bounties to the linebackers to take out the quarterback. Like, just take him off the field. I don't care if you break his legs, and take the 15-yard penalty. Who cares? Because then he's done for the season. The NFL said, this is not good for business. Like, we need some rules.
I did not expect that pivot.
Well, that's where we are with AI right now. It's like, hey,
Agree.
Forget it. I don't want to go down
All
there.
right, let's continue with the Anthropic story. This story pretty fascinating. So Anthropic expands Claude's agentic capacity. Two different sides to the equation here. Co-work gains scheduling, right? So this is a cron job. So Claude completes recurring tasks at specific times. For example, generating your morning briefing or spreadsheet updates or your Friday presentations. That element was very much what we saw in OpenClaw, right? And so it's interesting. And the second half of this is that Claude Code has enabled remote control. So you can kick off a task on your terminal and pick it up on your phone. You can control it from the Claude app or from a URL. And I'm wondering, this has probably been in the works for some time. So when Anthropic basically, tried to do the kibosh on Claude bot, I'm wondering if that was because they had this in the works. Basically, what OpenClaw has been doing is what Anthropic is just rolling out under a different approach.
Oh, for sure.
I
For
take
sure.
Anthropic at their face that this was, or OpenClaw, I guess, that the challenge was more trademark oriented than anything else. But I do think what have I been saying for weeks/days at this point that was distinctive about OpenClaw? It's the two things. It's headless, able to function autonomously for 24/7, and also that it's convenient to chat with via conventional messaging channels. And what do you see here with Cowork? Cowork is able to autonomously be scheduled headlessly. That's the headless part. And then remote control, that's the mobile messaging type part. But I think both of these are half measures. Like, I'm insufficiently motivated by each of these. I use Cowork from time to time, and I use Claude Code all the time. And neither of these, I think, is as compelling, at least conceptually, as a more OpenClaw-ish framework where all of these are cleanly packaged. And I think my guess is Anthropic and OpenAI and all of the other bigs will be forced to release their own sort of first-party OpenClaw competitor sometime in the next couple of months.